Welcome to the String Theory of the Unexplained. I'm your host, John Ventry. Our co-host is Fred Saluga, and our returning guest is Rhonda Vary. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about alien viruses, which then leads us into Roswell, and then leads us into Dr. David Jacobs' work on hybrids. The next extension from hybrids is hybrids. So welcome to our show. And today we're filming at my estate in Weston, Pennsylvania. This is our Japanese dining room. The table is a Japanese table with carvings on it. And Fred, Rhonda, you see this over here? I've had people over and said to them, what is that?
It's a Japanese samurai.
Absolutely.
Right.
Do you know you're like only the second person that has said that's a samurai? They look at it and say, I have no idea. I guess they never saw Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai.
It's pretty obvious.
But that's what it is. And it's in a Japanese room,
Yeah.
you know? That's got to be what it is. So, all right, so let's talk about cases, Fred, where, and there's also Dali artwork in here, Salvador Dali.
Right there.
Yeah, that's all Dali stuff from St. Petersburg. So I picked up this book from Dr. Robert Wood, who was on the board of MUFON. It's called Alien Viruses. And he also talks about MJ-12, chemical warfare, biowarfare, and crashed UFOs. So he actually has a list in here, Fred, of cases where he goes through history. He talks about the Black Death, the bubonic plague, that there are some people who claim that this came in on like a comet or an asteroid, and whatever it deposited killed, millions of people in Europe. 25 million people were killed by the Black Plague.
As opposed to the flea, or the fleas that were upon the rats, in which case they traded with China and believed that the fleas on the rats came through on the trade boats into Europe.
Yeah.
And therefore many people died because of the bubonic plague, which they contacted.
And that's the explanation that history
That's
will
what
give you.
history tells us.
But I read also that they talked about people back then, and there were descriptions of hooded people wearing hoods, and they had like green skin, almost like the Grim Reaper. I think that's probably where the Grim Reaper may have come from, the description of the Grim Reaper. One of the other interesting cases, and I've read this also, is the Fatima case, and then right afterwards, that was 1917 through 1918, the different sightings at Fatima, Peru. They said that the Spanish flu then popped up, and many people said that this was a UFO encounter, and that the flu, the influenza, was brought in by them, because it wasn't the Virgin Mary, it was actually a UFO encounter, because people described something that looked like a UFO. There were 50 million people killed worldwide with the Spanish flu. So can you imagine, you just finished World War I, 1917, and now you get an influenza that kills 50 million people. Probably 10 times more died from the flu than died from all of the fighting. So that's a possibility as far as what that goes. But what Dr. Woods describes is, he brings up the bubonic plague. He talks about in 1763, the British would give smallpox-infected blankets to the Indians. He talks about the Spanish flu. He talks about the Japanese Unit 731 during World War II that experimented on the Chinese. 1942 was when the United States started its biological weapons program. 1942. The Gulf War, Iran uses chemical weapons. 1984, the Soviet Union supposedly creates a super plague that could basically kill everybody. Sarin gas is used in Tokyo in 1995. 1998, the United States orders all its troops to be vaccinated for anthrax.
If you look at back in the 60s when they did the Extraterrestrial Exposure Act, that was allegedly, if they would bring something back from outer space, that they would be put in containment. So that's about the same thing. I don't know why you wouldn't have that in there.
Yeah, he may have in here. I mean, I only highlighted some of the highlights, but yeah, you're right. The Extraterrestrial Exposure Act, anything from space, don't touch it, leave the
Yeah.
area and report it. But we know from history, 1954 was Psalm 101, Extraterrestrial Entities and Technology Recovery and Disposal. This is part of
Right.
MJ-12. And 1973 is Project Moondust, again, talking about the recovery of anything that comes down from space. So, he goes through kind of the history of deaths from plagues, from alien crash landings, and to that extent. And he brings up that Fort Detrick in Maryland is where they kept a lot of this biological stuff, samples.
It's still there today.
Yeah.
Many of the buildings in Maryland house all types of biological viruses and warfare, and it's under top secret surveillance.
That's where allegedly AIDS was developed.
What did?
AIDS.
Oh, AIDS. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
AIDS. Huh. So he goes through this history. We also have, like we know from the UFO side, that in Mexico in 1974, at Coyame, Mexico, 4 Mexican soldiers died. What happened was, and there are documents on this, a UFO was picked up in the Gulf heading towards Corpus Christi. It then makes a left turn, goes south, comes back northwest, and it crash lands in Coyame, Mexico. It was being monitored the whole time. We asked the Mexicans, do you want us involved in the retrieval? They said no. They send a truck with soldiers, 4 soldiers. I guess when they got there and tried to pick the bodies up or do something, all 4 soldiers died. Mexico contacted the U.S., who then went down in biological suits, etc., and they got the remains of that. So that supports his book,
Right.
that either the aliens themselves can contaminate us or they bring contamination in with them. There was another case in Colares, Brazil in 1977. This one described the UFOs using lasers, and the people there are pretty poor,
Right.
and it's shining these lasers on them, burning them, actually burning the different people. So that's another case. He talks about that the military from 1958 to 61, at least 2 people died from Ebola. It was a flesh-eating virus, so that's where it came from. What you had said again, like you said, Fort Detrick. It came to the conclusion that UFOs were deliberately being crashed by aliens to poison the human race. They were viruses of extraterrestrial origin. I know it's interesting when you look at the CDC. People think that's a private company, but it's not. I mean, think it's a government company, but it's not. It's a private company. They make $4.6 billion. They own the vaccine for Ebola, SARS, hepatitis A, HIV, anthrax, West Nile, Zika, and a number of the pet boosters. You're not allowed to sue the CDC. So do you think that they actually introduce these every few years? Then they can make a whole lot of money.
I think they're all designer diseases.
I agree with you.
You know, when you look at the Ebola, when the Ebola scare came out, the African American guy that came, he's the one that allegedly had it real bad, and they said he died. I don't really believe the guy died. If he'd have died, they'd have had it on TV. They'd have had the funeral and everything else. Everybody else was over there. Nobody else died over here. They wanted to send the Marines in there because of the silver mines or gold mines, whatever it was there. And that's the way they used it. And I think that's what they do. They kill a few people and
scare everybody out of the area.
yeah, and then they do what they want to do.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, that was the Colares case in 1977. In Brazil, you got Bahia, Brazil, 1996. This was a really interesting case. I remember reading about this years ago. These kids are, it's a UFO crash. These kids are playing, they're like preteens or young teenagers, and they see these creatures. They got like reddish skin, big eyes. They got like a bony cranium where it's a large bone down the middle, and on each side it's like a large bony area. They thought they were dealing with like devils,
Right.
you know. So what these kids do is they start grabbing rocks and bricks and throwing it at them. They actually stoned one of them to death in Bohemia, you know. So what happened then was the EMT showed up, and this particular guy, he lifts the creature up, and he puts it on a gurney puts it in the ambulance. Like the following day, he gets sick. He passes away a couple of days later.
Yeah.
So again, it's an example of where they could be bringing viruses in either naturally or deliberately to get rid of people.
If you look at Brazil, you have travels down there.
A lot of cases down
I mean,
there.
half the people in Brazil was getting killed by UFOs down there.
Yeah.
I mean, for some unknown reason.
Well, you know, I've said this, Rhonda, that you got so many cases in the United States being reported, not a lot around the world. But if I was an alien and I showed up and I could survey the globe, I would see these hot nuclear weapons all around the northern areas, you know, from Europe to North America to China to Soviet Union. And I would say, you know what? I'm staying away from that area. I'm going to Brazil. I'm going to Africa, Southeast Asia. I'm going to the third world areas to do my work.
Right.
And just think of how much actually does happen, never reported. Because if we have these cases, what's going on in those underdeveloped areas where they can barely communicate with telephone lines, you know?
Especially since new diseases are always being found. It makes you wonder if the aliens are coming to our world and dropping them off here, their diseases.
Absolutely. It's either accidental or on purpose. Did you ever hear of the Blue Boy revelations in 2006? Blue Boy? I never heard of that either, but he's got it here in his book. It's basically the bacterial biological virus angle to Roswell. I had never heard that before
never heard of it
regarding
either.
Roswell. He said it was given to everybody from Tim Cooper, not the other Cooper. Right? It was Tim Cooper. And he said that New Mexico was abuzz with all kinds of aircraft and UFO crashes. 1991, you have the status report by Leonard Stringfield that talked about crash and retrieval. You know, they talked about those green fireballs, ghost rockets. There were New Mexico crashes, Germany in World War II, and then they talked about Roswell, and that there was a that Roswell was a U.S. biological experiment.
Right.
I remember we've said that the 1936 crash in the Black Forest
Right.
and Project Paperclip was Roswell from Project Paperclip.
Right.
We had 2 years to develop that.
Right.
And the crash was not extraterrestrial. The Black Forest was, but Roswell wasn't. So, and that basically we're experimenting with a lot of this stuff now is what he's saying. He said that the 1947 crashes was the start of a colossal cover-up. He again mentions Japan's Unit 731. We know they were doing warfare, practicing these biologics on humans.
Right.
We got that information and we continued it in the United States.
Yeah, we brought them in to do it.
Yeah. We brought their scientists in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And gave them houses and jobs. You know, so Cooper says that his source on this is the CIA. It was called the Blue Boy documents. It links Roswell, not extraterrestrials, to biological warfare activities. And he has documents, but they're in a draft form. Like so much else in this field, it's a draft form. So you don't know if what he's saying is real or he drafted it up, you know.
But I was telling you, they had an episode in the Nora, Pennsylvania back in the 50s. It was like 3 days. There was some kind of fog. And nobody knew what it was. It just came in and didn't leave. And I think about 100 people died from it. And then it just went away. I mean, they have no idea why they died.
Yeah. Well, there's been those fogs before. Wasn't there in Turkey? There was the British, that one unit of the British. They were there during World War I. They saw this fog come in. The FARC, and they were surrounded by troops, and when the FARC left, all the
They were
Brits were gone.
Yeah,
All the Brits were gone, and there was that other battalion in, the Roman battalion
Yeah.
in Scotland, the whole battalion just
Right,
disappeared.
same thing.
you know?
Maybe it was a test by the government.
Who knows? But back then, it had to be something else, or they went into a different dimension or something. But since that book talked about Roswell, let's segue into Roswell a little bit, 1947. We just had Tom Carey speak on Roswell at the Philly conference. But, you know, he brings up some really good points with Roswell. He gives a little timeline here. He says that there were 600 witnesses that have come forward to support the Roswell UFO. He says it's UFO. 600 witnesses. He said that Colonel Blanchard announced the recovery, so he's a colonel. He announces it. Mac Brazel was the guy who recovered all the debris, and he was detained by the Army for 4 days while they picked up everything. He said armed guards encircled the area. A second group cordoned and placed around the outer perimeter. Riflemen were stationed. The MPs were posted all over the area. There was unscheduled flights, I guess they checked the records, between Washington, D.C., White Sands, Fort Bliss, Kirkland Air Force Base, and Roswell. And that the remains were brought to Fort Worth, Dayton, Ohio, and Andrews Air Force Base. He gives a nice little overview here of Roswell and Los Alamos. He said that Senator Dennis Chavez, he phoned the radio station in Roswell, KGFL, and told them not to broadcast the Mac Brazel interview. They were told to not broadcast that. The FBI has a telex, basically disputes what General Ramey said, that it was a weather balloon that was found. The U.S. military came in and searched the offices to take copies of that original press release to recover it, and the recorded interview from Mac Brazel was confiscated. Kind of similar with Kecksburg too. They came in and told the reporter he couldn't say what he wanted to say.
Right.
Well, the 24 witnesses, military and civilian, talk about memory material that would fold up and just come back to life. There was sworn testimony. He said Senator Barry Goldwater approached General Curtis LeMay in 1994 wanting to get access to those records. 1993, and you've brought this up, was Congressman Stephen Schiff. He sent letters wanting that, and then he gets
Fast-acting cancer.
fast-acting brain cancer, and he passes away. There are deathbed testimonies saying that there were non-human entities there, and that there was one survivor. And there were.
And when you talk about LeMay, he told Goldwater, "Don't you ever ask me that again, and don't you ever mention it again."
Yeah, and there were physical threats against many people. You know, and it's funny. LeMay never said there was none. He just said, "Never asked me."
Yeah.
Then he says Leonard Stringfield, in his documents, they described with Roswell a humanoid, 3.5 to 4 feet tall, weighed 40 pounds. The head was larger than a human, larger round eyes. Its nose was just a slit. I mean, its mouth was just a slit. It served no function. It didn't eat. It didn't have teeth, and it didn't communicate with its mouth. It had no earlobes, no hair. It had like a slight kind of fuzzy type hair, I guess, on the skin. The neck was too thin for the torso. The arms were very long, down to the knee, and the fingers had a slight webbing between the fingers. You know, he said that the skin was a blue-gray and scaly, and it was actually stretchable. And it was more like a lizard, like an iguana. Now, we just did the skull experiment, and they were able to resurrect a blue-gray alien,
Right.
and they described the exact same one from Roswell. And they brought that up through experiments with mediums.
Yeah.
So this blue-gray alien that pops up, is it really alien? Or is it something else, you know? They had no reproductive system. There were no red blood cells. They didn't have lungs for oxygen. no digestive system, no internal or even rectal area. So could it be an android, a robot? Could it be something that's not quite human that they got in Roswell, if that's where it was
But
from?
it could have been too back in 47, that's when we started spying on everybody.
Yeah.
So we crashed a ship and said it was a UFO, so that anything that they seen after that, oh my God, I'm seeing a UFO, and they just went along with it.
It's a
And
cover-up for a
It
government
was actually a
project.
cover-up for the government.
Yeah. And now then, if you remember this, Walter Haut, he passed away in
Right.
December of 2002, but he left a signed affidavit, a deathbed confession. He was the base public information officer, and he leaves this confession talking about the wreckage, Colonel Blanchard. I mean, basically describing the whole thing that took place. So he basically said that was all real in his deathbed confession. There was another one in 1995 from Major Saunders, who was at the base in 1947, and he said that it's a deathbed confession. Files were altered, so were personnel records, along with assignments and various coding, changing serial numbers so that these records couldn't be found. And he said silence fell. It was not broken for almost 45 years. And you know, in our Kecksburg investigation, we found the guy who was at Kecksburg who claimed to have been at Roswell also.
Oh, yeah.
And he said that he destroyed the Kecksburg evidence because it was a Soviet satellite, but that he destroyed the evidence, that's why it couldn't be found. But he was at the Roswell also, is the story that we were told. He had passed away, so again, you can't verify what's
Right.
being told, but that's the story that was being told to us. So now that takes us to, you know, we're following this line of thinking here to these aliens and the hybrid program that then pops up, is we get to Dr. David Jacobs, who talked at our conference in Philly also, and this is his book, Walking Among Us, The Alien Plan to Control Humanity. So this is the hybrid plan that everybody talks about them integrating our society. So with this one,
Well, it's a little confusing because if the Greys don't have any reproductive organs, how can there be a hybrid? Or a
where do they
human?
come from?
Exactly.
How do they reproduce?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
total
good point.
mystery.
Yeah, if you don't have any reproductive organs, how are you creating hybrids? You know, there you go. Very good point. So, what Jacob says is that, you know, the New Age people, you know, they're looking for this higher state of consciousness, spirituality. I don't agree with any of this stuff, you know, that the aliens are here to stop ruining the environment and, you know, they want to welcome us to the community of planets. And he says the aliens are less concerned about the environment and more about what kind of planet that they can have for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, if their concern is for the environment, it's because how are they going to live in this environment? That's what the aliens are concerned with.
Then I guess they better stop dropping off their garbage viruses,
Yeah.
But they don't bother them.
Yeah.
polluting our
Yeah.
our continent,
But for some
and our
reason,
world.
why can't they get rid of us though? If
Right.
they're dropping off these viruses, then
Yeah.
how come they haven't been able to get rid of
Maybe
us?
That's it. Maybe
They don't
that's
want
what
to.
they're trying
It
to do.
isn't the right time.
I think they need us for something.
Yeah.
I think they can't reproduce. They need us for these experiments and stuff,
Yeah.
even if they're done in a lab, and they
Well-
don't want to wipe out the whole planet.
The big thing now is they're taking our souls. Now, I'm starting to read into some of that now, but I don't understand the whole philosophy behind it. But they don't have souls, and for them to actually live longer and whatever, they need souls. So
Yeah.
they're getting our souls now. And a lot of these, and I really believe it, a lot of these groups that do the abduction research, they say that, oh my God, these people that all have been abducted, they love it, they think it's really wonderful and you should be abducted.
Yeah.
They may be part of it.
Well, that's what he says.
Yeah, they're part of it,
Yeah.
where they're saying do this and they're letting the aliens have them. So I mean, again, we got our own people within the United States screwing us over.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
exactly what he says. Is that the soul thing to me? You're dealing with demonic. You're not dealing
Right.
with aliens. Aliens can't take your soul. You're dealing with fallen angels at that point. You're not dealing with aliens. But he says that these people, when they're taken and you have a hybrid kid, some of those people are then, why they keep coming back is for you to raise that kid and for you to tutor the child in how the world works, because they have no clue. They don't understand, why do you eat, mashed potatoes with a spoon, but you eat hamburgers with your hand, you pick it up and eat a hamburger. They don't understand any of that type of stuff that goes on. So that's basically, Fred, what you had said. It's really what he said. He says that they've gotten to the point where it's like 95% human and 5% alien,
Right.
but you're still connected with this hive mentality. There's enough alien DNA. He calls the hybrids because they could fit into the society. You could be one, but you still have this connection to the aliens and what they want to do.
Well, we had a UFO case that I investigated. It was in Ohio, and the guy called in reports that he was a reptoid hybrid. And talking to him, I finally got where I could meet him somewhere. And he said that he don't understand how the reptilians found out about it, but they said if he met me, they would kill him. And he wanted to know where did the information come to them when he called it into an organization that's supposed to be secretive. Yeah. So, I mean, how did they get it?
Confidential.
Yeah.
I get so many different stories too.
Right.
It's hard to figure out what's real, what's not real. He talks about these relationships now how does the hybrid have a relationship? Because they don't really understand anything. And he says the insect, he calls them insectolins instead of insectoids.
Yeah.
He calls it similar. But he says they're really in charge. They control the Greys and the reptilians. And but the Greys really have no emotions, which is part of the problem. They're emotionless. And,
because they're not real.
Yeah.
I mean, they're,
But they got human DNA in them, So it's really difficult for them to understand how our society works. And he said some of them can have mental disorders because, I guess they get no love, no compassion, and they don't understand, what they're doing here, All abductees are lifelong victims of the abduction program, because we've always been told they keep coming back and taking the abductee against their will. And a lot of them are betraying the human race, exactly what you said, right?
But see, again, if you look at that now, you had the MyLabs back in 80s and 90s, which were military being involved in the abduction process or taking someone who's been abducted and then they interview them and get their information. So if this is happening, what is their part in this whole thing? If they're doing this too. And again, the people that are saying they're investigating the abductions, why aren't they being brought into this? I mean, I'm sure that if I'm abducted and I see a gray and I see a reptilian, I'm going to say, yeah, I've seen a military person too. Or we just cutting that part of it out altogether now.
Well, the whole thing with this too is they don't have full memory.
Yeah.
With demonic possession and alien abduction, your memory is vague, yet with a near-death experience, you remember the whole thing. You remember the whole thing. But these other two, you almost have to do the aggressive hypnosis, and then they say, well, that's not really good to get to it. What he says is after the abduction, he says some abductees, and I've read this, they retain some sort of telepathic abilities, and it kind of wears off after time. And I can vouch for that, because when this stuff was going on in this house, the morning my grandson was born, as I was waking up, I saw this woman who said, she's in a field of butterflies right now, which means my daughter was picking out the soul of her son. And then I wake up and find out my daughter's in labor, And then when we were in St. Louis, I had this dreadful feeling we were going to get in a car accident and the baby was going to get hurt. Hour later, we got in a car accident, but the baby was fine. We all got whiplash.
So you mentioned something interesting here. The field of butterflies, your daughter was picking out the soul
of her son.
So where was the soul at that she was picking out?
Heaven.
Okay, or was it with them?
Yeah, it ain't with aliens. I don't think aliens have anything to do with souls. Whitley Strieber will tell you they're here for a soul. I
don't
don't,
know.
but you see,
I
to
don't
come
know.
for your soul would be make them extremely malevolent. I don't see how they could capture your soul, you know?
I don't either, but
Yeah, but
this
then
is the
how-
word.
we can't figure it out, so,
Yeah.
so who knows, you know? So, but I agree with that part. And then he says it wears off over time. And I can tell you, since 6 months, I've had no premonitions, no feelings, no nothing. But those two things did happen earlier this year, coming right off of being able to drive out some sort of malevolent entity in the house. Because there is contact, and there could be contact while you're sleeping too, and you don't know it, you know? But I don't feel any of that anymore, it's worn off. They said hybrids teach abductees actually how to use their mind. And, you know, I think of the Betty Andreeshen case, the Carla Turner case, you know, where they thought they were in contact with aliens, but their cases were strictly, in my opinion, demonic possessions. I think that, I really do. When you read what they described, and I think there's an overlap here that people are missing, you know? Because a lot of this whole hybrid thing could be the Nephilim. It's the same exact stuff, but we call it something else, you know? People just don't want to say anything that's religious. You know, if you say angels and fallen angels, oh, it's religion, that's all BS, and that's part of the problem. He says that these hybrids now are already here. They're among us. They could be walking around with us. They're very logical. The program is logical. He says humans are the obstacle, but we have the means to resist their invasion. And he says there's a lot of choices. They can destroy our civilization completely, right? Or they can convince humans the takeover is in their best interest and have a smooth transition. Or they can just take over without anybody knowing, do it very covertly. And then he says that the third option appears to be operative. That's what they're doing, taking over without telling us. He says when people report UFOs or abductions, scientists summarily dismiss the accounts. They don't believe anything. And we know that.
No.
You can't go to the psychology field, the therapist. They're going to put you on medication if you start talking about this stuff. You know, that's what they do. He said the first aliens arrived here decades ago. I think he said after 1930. And I talk about that
Yeah,
1936 Black Forest crash.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
important, you know. They've taken time to learn about our biology, physiology, neurology. They can alter humans. We're perfect candidates for what they want to do. They're very well ordered. They're nonviolent. It's a stealthy takeover, the end of human control over our own destiny. He says the threat is the end of humans, basically, Homo sapiens, and the beginning of a new species, Homo alienus, which are these hybrids that are mostly human, but they still are hybrids, you know. He says the program has 9 components to it. 1, advanced technology and bioengineering.
Mhm.
All right. He says the UFOs may be mobile, be able to integrate into our society. Everything in them are made for abducting and processing humans. So basically, the craft is a like an incubator. The craft's purpose is to abduct, create hybrids and hybrids, and it's a big nursery, basically. You know. He says there's an advanced global workforce that are bringing a workforce of workers to them that they're altering. He says if grays and other hybrids cannot reproduce, they can easily be replaced. Okay, I guess they have the engineering to do that.
Right.
As the population increases, more UFOs with insectoids will be used. So apparently the insectoids are the ones behind this. He says all aliens can control humans' process, our thoughts and our behavior. Is nothing we can do. We're unable to resist them when you're in their presence. Okay, it's very secret. He says there's a memory blockage that you can't remember. But it's the same thing with demonic possession. You can't remember this stuff, you know. Abductees are neurologically programmed to forget.
Same thing as MK Ultra.
Yeah. So is it the government?
Yeah.
I mean, this thing, it just goes around. It's so interwoven like a spider's web, you know? It's so hard to figure out.
But you know, the interesting thing too, you said that the ships are whatever. People that go on the ships say that they may look like they're small here, but once you get on them, they may be a half a
They're
mile.
huge, yeah.
So, I mean, that don't make sense to us, but is it true? I mean, how could it look like something small to us and be a half a mile long inside?
Travis Walton got taken by a
Yeah.
50-foot craft, and then when he's in there, it's like miles long.
Yeah.
There's hangars with other
Yeah.
crafts, smaller craft and everything. I don't know. He says here, if women knew what was really being done, the women would abort their pregnancies. And he says the aliens remove the fetuses at around 10 weeks before the women start to show, and the doctor assumes it's a miscarriage or a false pregnancy. And that happens a lot where the women,
We've had a couple cases like that.
yeah.
And the baby was missing, and the one lady said the doctor, she's a son of a bitches, again. I mean, that's all he said. And he
But
said, "We
sometimes
got
they don't
miscarriage."
even have the
But they don't have the
fetus.
fetus.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. When he found out, he just said, them son of a bitches. And
Them.
then
Them.
Yeah, them. And there was no fetus. But he
Yep.
would not say nothing else to her. And that's what, 'cause she,
You can turn your phone off. It says hybrid children. It's good music though. It's the
Yeah.
X-Files. He says hybrid children are able to download information from abductees' minds. So when you're in their presence, they download your thoughts and your experiences. They said aliens seem to have unlimited time. They have a long-range program. They have to ascertain whether humans are biologically suited for them. There's testing done, and they mapped out their plans to infiltrate our society. They say abductees are critical to this because they need the sperm and the ova, and the abductees teach them about Earth. So these people are basically traitors to us. Once they're involved, they stay willingly with the program, helping these hybrid kids.
but see, again now, you're saying they take the fetuses and this and that. Well, what to say that once the baby's born, the fetus, he don't have a soul now, but he has a soul if we give him one.
Well, maybe they're trying to take the soul for them
Yeah,
because
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But I
yeah.
don't think the soul can be in a creature that's not human. You know,
Hmm.
I don't think you could transfer soul to a non-human creature that's not in the image of God, human. You know, if it's inhuman, I don't think you can have a soul. Or they're trying to destroy us to take the souls. I don't know. But he says the hybrids are the ultimate weapon against our planet. They're kind of like self-replicating until a critical mass is reached that they can control society. It's secretive and they're going to take over. And he says most abductions that were ever reported was after 1930. And like I said, we talked about 1936. He says that some of the non-abducting aliens that aren't involved in this would allow the UFOs to be seen. That's the ones we're seeing, the ones not doing the abductions. They're not here for that, so we see those. He says the abduction phenomenon represents a leap forward in human evolution. It's genetic engineering,
Right,
it's not
right.
really evolution, you know? The change means that evolution for humans will come in a more sudden spurt through the aliens, you know? And artificially engineered evolution imposed upon us for the benefit of the other species. It's unnatural selection, and that they do not have a sense of humanity. They're not humane. It's a hierarchy type society with a collective hive, a military mentality. It's a colony that's supreme. They use telepathy, and they prevent individuality and privacy. To me, it's a form of slavery. And that's what you see with demonic possession, and you see with alien abduction. It's a form of slavery. They control you. They erase your memory, and they keep coming back against your will. That's why I say they're one and the same.
You're bringing up something interesting here again now, slavery. Okay. The guy that talked out at the symposium said that they're slaves on Mars. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's look at Dave Paulides as people being missing. Where are they going? Are they being abducted for the reason of going to Mars and being slaves?
It could be, but it would have to be underground, I would think, whatever this colony is, right?
Right,
There's
but I mean,
no atmosphere there on Mars.
but how do we know? I mean, how do we really know what's going on up there?
People disappear,
Yeah.
and a lot
I
of
mean,
children disappear.
So where are they going?
Yep, I agree with you. He says another scenario is if societies were destroyed from within through the knowledge that this change is happening. Another scenario is not knowing what's occurring until it's too late. The change would be too advanced to be stopped. It's almost like immigration. There's a point where all these third world people come in and you've lost your country. That's exactly what's happening with immigration too. There's a possibility that that hybrids are here to protect people, that some of them, and I think that would happen, some of them would change sides like we've changed sides and protect us. The evolution of hybrids into humanity, hybrids that care, they can control the humans, but the humans can't control them. Resistance to them would be impossible no matter which scenario takes place. Either way, we can't do anything about it. The fact that they're secretive, though, and this is important, implies there's weakness in their program because they're being very secretive about it. Taking advantage of that weakness, however, is unlikely unless the scientific community gets involved and tries to figure this out. That's a good point. The fact that they're secretive, they're not all powerful.
But who are they? I mean, are they in our government now? Are they running our government?
It could be. That's one of the
And
scenarios.
that's one of the secret things that they're doing. I mean, that's the secretive part of it. They're actually running our government and telling everybody what to do.
I never believed that, but now to me it's more possible.
Yeah.
It really is. He says there's more male than female hybrids because the males can impregnate any female, right? They don't really need the females because they have human females. They need the males to do the impregnating. And it's an eventual takeover of humanity, leaving a small, pure stock of humans left eventually. It ensures the alien survival, and they'll keep some of us in case they have to restock again. It's like an internment camp, you know? We could be herded into UFOs and transported elsewhere or enclosed in areas where they can come back and use us again. Like I said, slavery. They're describing slavery here, you know?
Mars. That's what he's saying right there, going to Mars.
Yeah. So he says, why are they doing this? You know, he says it's for their survival, right? It says the aliens' home planet could be in crisis. This is an opportunity to take over a completely already made civilization. Right. By acquiring planets and populations, one group of aliens obtain influence over the other groups of aliens out there. It's like building an empire. The more planets you take over, you become stronger. Earth has an abundance of resources, and that aliens are engaged in interplanetary acquisition because they want to do it, can do it, and it benefits them. So we're almost done here. So then he talks about the reptiles. I know that's one of your favorites, the reptilians.
I love the reptiles.
So he says now the reptilians have the same function as the Greys. They contribute to this change. They are reported very infrequently. You don't get a lot of reports about, you don't get a lot of insect reports or reptilian reports, you know?
We get a few reptilians.
Yeah, more than insects though, I would say.
We don't get no insects.
Yeah, I don't ever see those. Who was that guy down in Tennessee who reported those insect ones? The two brothers. Oh, I can't think of the name right now. And it was a weird insect that had like the legs that went up and then down, you know? It'll come to me after the show. But that might be the only insect case that I remember, you know? He said that the insects have made the reptilians their workers, and they basically work them like the Greys and the hybrids. And that aliens taken from other insect planets, the aliens who were hybridized with insectilians. So basically, the insect ones are in control of this, and they're taking them from various planets. The Greys were created from humans, and the combination of the insect and the human created the Grey. I don't know about that. I don't know about that.
You look at the reptilian too, okay. Adam and Eve, all right? Adam and Eve, whatever was told Adam or Eve to eat the apple, right? And God says, from now on you shall slither on your stomach. So it became a snake.
The reptilian.
Okay, so it was a reptilian before that.
Yeah. So again, the whole scenario in so many of these UFO cases and things that they say, Rhonda, can also be applied to the angel, fallen angel story. We're just calling them something else. It really is. Either there's all various things doing the same thing, or it's one, and we don't want to call it that, we call it something else.
Right.
I don't know.
They're all together.
Yeah, or they're working together, who knows? They possess previous knowledge of how to capture a planet. They've done this before. Taking over another planet is standard practice for them, and it's happening to us. And Jacobs concludes his book by saying the UFO phenomenon might signal contact with another species. The abduction evidence has forced me to evolve into a fearful investigator. I have uncovered the alien reality, and I don't like it. So he's got that negative view that we're being taken over.
Well, but see, he's one. I mean, there's how many of them out there are saying, "Oh no, that's not true." I think a lot of these people are doing the research. I'd like to do a show on that. That they're actually not getting an adequate database, so to speak. You're okay, like the one person we know. Okay, he's picked up every night, and they come to visit him every night.
Yeah.
I mean, so they're friends of his.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's talk about the person that they pick up at 3 o'clock in the morning. They probe him, they put needles in him and this and that. That's not a good thing here. But they don't talk to those people because they won't talk to them.
Yeah.
So their whole investigation is one-sided. It's not accurate.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, that's we've taken it here from viruses to Roswell to the hybrid program. And that's our show this week, and we'll come back with more ideas and more episodes. Thank you.